Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today. We'll just wait a couple more minutes for everyone else to join. But yeah, first of all, I'd like to introduce my colleague Killian, who's joining us from Barcelona today. He's our lead energy analyst in Orkestra. So it's the brains behind a lot of what we do in the tool. So yeah, just wanted to introduce Killian. How's the weather today in Barcelona, Killian?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's pretty much warm as it has been for the last couple months. So a little bit steamy outside, but all good here.
Good stuff. Good cricket playing weather.
Indeed, unbelievably, we have not had rained out game for about 6 months now. So yep, it's amazing where you can find a good cricket match.
Dreamy, dreamy. I think you've succeeded in finding the most similar climate to Perth, right, where you're from?
Exactly. Originally from Perth, and then pretty much just looked at what's the closest weather we can get in Europe, and Barcelona was pretty high on that list. So used to the heats, but yeah, been a hot summer, that's for sure.
Good stuff. Well, it's cooling down today here in the UK. But yeah, I think we're all due some rain over here. So yeah, looking forward to a bit of cooler weather.
Good.
Good stuff. Fantastic. Well, I think we'll get going because we've got lots to cover here. And I know Killian's got a really interesting demo as well coming up. So we want to get into the crux of it. So if you could move to the next slide, Killian. Fantastic. So yeah, let me just talk you through today what we're going to cover. So we've got a packed agenda, and we'll basically we'll be running through a demo, some useful tips on how you can help sell more solar and batteries, and how we can drive that conversation away from price and that pence per kilowatt hour focus to actually more of a conversation about value. What are we looking to achieve? Is it energy independence? Is it cost certainty? What's actually going to tick the box really for your customer? And we'll look at that in a demo and how Orkestra can really help you find that solution really quickly. So that's what we're looking to cover today. As I say, just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you could put your Q&A there's actually a Q&A section at the bottom. So if you could put that in there, you might have a 3 dots more section under that. You should be able to click Q&A rather than in the chat, just so that we can make sure we cover all your questions. But yeah, really keen to have lots of engagement on this, and we get some fantastic questions. So I'm sure that we'll have some more great questions today to get our teeth into. Fantastic. Next slide, please, Killian. Great stuff. So I'm sure many of you know who Orkestra is, where we've come from. We're obviously an Australian business. We're actually the market leader already in Australia. We've been going about 5 years. And we're now rapidly expanding across Europe. So you can see, we've got work across the breadth of the solar and battery industry, with our main markets in Europe being Germany and the UK. And you can see that, we're supporting customers, right across the board in the solar industry, across multiple technologies, tariff optimization, and also what we'll look at today is how that financing model can work and how we can really enable you to get more bankable solutions for your customers to get projects off the ground. Next slide, please, Killian. Fantastic. So I'm going to hand over to Killian now, and Killian's going to give you a bit more in-depth analysis of how we can really carve up these battery opportunities in terms of a PPA and get more projects off the ground. So I'll hand over to Killian now.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining. For those who haven't met me, my name's Killian. I'm the lead energy analyst here at Orkestra. I bring about 10 years of experience financing projects around the world. Everything from, utility scale, a couple 100 megawatt batteries, all the way down to sort of 100 kilowatt solar systems. So today I'm going to sort of talk through a bit of financial structuring, as well as how we can look at different opportunities, and particularly in the PPA and battery space. So firstly, just wanted to talk about the market context, and I'm sure we're all very familiar with this, but energy price volatility is no longer an exception. It really is the new normal. Since 2021, we've seen about 70% increase in pricing. The UK is about 50% higher than France and Germany. And quite critically, we've had two major price shocks in the last 4 years, being the Ukraine invasion as well as the US-Iran war, which has really had a massive impact on local electricity prices. Now, all that volatility and price increase has been a very strong financial driver for locking in PPAs. But I think importantly, it's also good to keep this as context on how we think about PPA deals and behind the meter infrastructure going forward. So although PPAs have really benefited from these price increases, what we're seeing is that PPA providers that lead on pence per kilowatt hour are losing. And that's really because they're still leaving a lot of value on the table. So within the market, there is a strong P per kilowatt hour trap. Essentially, when you lead on price, you invite the customer to shop and it becomes a race to the bottom. So in an ultra competitive market, we want to make sure that PPA cos are able to differentiate themselves. And the way we see that is the alternative, which is to lead with value and start with the customer's business problem and then demonstrate the value holistically, not purely just on trying to offer the absolute lowest headline number. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, this narrow focus on pence per kilowatt hour means the whole industry is struggling to demonstrate the benefits of batteries. And today we're going to sort of prove this with some very clear case studies and examples, but just as a bit of a teaser here, we've got two options. We've got option A, which is a solar-only 500 kilowatt solar system with a PPA rate of 9.8 pence per kilowatt hour. While option B, we have a solar and battery combination, 700 kilowatt solar system and 200 kilowatt hour battery with a higher PPA rates of 11.1p per kilowatt hour. Now, typically, this whole race to the bottom leads customers to try and focus on what is that headline number and just look for the lowest number possible. That unfortunately incentivizes them to go with option A, when what we want to prove to you today is that option B is actually a far better solution, both for the PPA co, for investors, as well as the customers. Even though it's got a higher headline rates, we can show that the savings are stronger and it's a better outcome for all the parties involved. So when we think about this problem, we want to start with who buys PPAs and importantly, why do they buy them? So the customer buying drivers are typically, it's a financial buyer at a large business. They're looking to lock in energy costs for a long time. And this is something we're seeing more and more. As we demonstrated on the first slide, the continuing price increases and volatility, the unawareness of what is the next shock or how soon the next shock is going to happen is making CFOs and financial buyers really driven to try and lock in a long-term energy price. Thirdly, we're seeing more and more customers valuing the carbon benefits, especially if you're dealing with large organizations, multinationals that have ESG goals. The carbon benefits are becoming more and more important. Fourthly, we do see customers more and more valuing having third-party own and operate the system. From the customer's perspective, this takes away the complexity of worrying about maintenance, cleaning, the installation or the operations. So it's really a turnkey solution that they can sign a contract and have delivered for them. Where this all leads to is that PPA buyers want energy price certainty at low risk. So we want to make sure that we structure our pitch to these CFOs and to these financial buyers. And the pitch structure is really what separates a closed deal from one that just gets stored or constantly in back and forth emails waiting for approval. Now, from our experience and what we see in the market with our customers is that selling solar PPAs, it is difficult. And adding complexity before the solar is agreed can stall the whole deal. It can become overwhelming and it can become confusing for the end customer, especially when they are maybe from a financial background and might not necessarily have the same energy expertise as yourselves. So what things stall the deal? Firstly, leading on the pence per kilowatt hour pricing. This invites a price-only comparison. It invites them not to look at your whole package. Secondly, presenting a single bundled ask where all the solar and battery and tariff are all put together into one stack. This can lead to confusion and it obscures where the value is being driven from. Thirdly, opening the battery conversation before the solar is agreed. We'll come back to this in a bit more detail in a minute, but what we want to do is really lock in that solar and make sure that you get the solar deal over the line and then look at how you can upsell with value either through batteries and tariffs. Fourthly, letting tariff complexity become the customer's problem. Like we said before, a lot of the buyers, they might be CFO backed or financial controllers, and the energy space can often be a new space for a lot of our customers or a lot of the customers that we're presenting deals to. So as energy experts, we highly, stress the point that taking on that tariff complexity for the customer, it really differentiates you and it allows you to present more wholesome projects that look at the full value stack. So what then wins the deal? The numbers that show CFO level value, not just unit rates. As a CFO, you're interested in seeing the full NPV of your investments, the ROI, the savings, not just purely a pence per kilowatt hour number. Secondly, lock in that solar first. It's already a great deal on its own. Make sure that they understand that. And then add the battery and tariff as presented optional upgrades. Get the simple piece over the line or get the high value item over the line, then look at how you can upsell with batteries and tariffs. Lastly, look at a modular structure. Each step should be independently committable so that you can match your project with exactly the needs of each customer. So let's have a look at that in terms of a bit of a practical presentation here, a bit of a practical case. So don't make one bundled ask, present 3 different options and let the customer choose what their ceiling is and what works best for them. So what we've done here was we've structured it into 3 different levels, vanilla, strawberry and chocolates, our Neapolitan ice cream flavors, I would argue in order of worst to best. So starting with the simplest being our vanilla. So start with just presenting the pure solar PPA. Make this the base case. Prove to the customer solar only is a great deal. It stands on its own. And importantly, make sure that the customer understands that B and C are not required to close this deal and that A is worthwhile on its own. Fundamentally, if you can't get A over the line, you're not going to be able to get B and C over the line. So start with just the solar PPA. Secondly, talk about adding a battery on its own. Talk about adding a battery that just stores the surplus solar for later. So it's the same structure, but you just have a battery, very simply, stores excess solar and immediately discharges it. It's simple for customers to understand. Operationally, it's intuitive. You use additional electrons that are generated from the solar system that weren't previously being utilized or were either being curtailed or exported back to the grid. Thirdly, once you've got those 2 items locked away, then it's time to look at our chocolate option, the best option. How can you add optimization of your battery to really unlock value for customers? So for customers who are open to a time of use tariff or have a pass-through in their network tariff of red, amber, and green charges, this step multiplies the battery's value immensely. It's completely optional. It can be implemented post-install. It's not necessarily a condition of the PPA, but this really opens up for much larger savings that could not be achieved purely with the with the vanilla and strawberry options alone. So let's dive into a bit of numbers. Let's make this practical and put it into the context of a project. So we've got our case study here, which is amped up parts, and you can see this as one of the example projects within your Orkestra accounts or free trial. Essentially, it's a 5-day manufacturer, energy consumption 1.2 gigawatt hours per year, approximately 500 kilowatts in demand, electricity bill about £250,000 on a full pass-through tariff, and we're looking at offering them a take-or-pay solar PPA. So we're going to go through 3 scenarios of that: vanilla, strawberry, and chocolates. And I'm going to show you the numbers, the results in a bit more detail, but here's a little bit of a sneak peek of what it looks like within Orkestra. But simply moving from left to right, our vanilla solar-only option, 500 kilowatts of solar, gets you pretty good savings, £30,000 per year on a 9.8 kilowatt-hour PPA rates. Now, we've solved this from the PPA codes having the same rate of return for all these projects. And you can see as we increase to the next level, to strawberry, we add a battery, we increase the solar size, and we see those annual savings increase up to 33,000, about a 10% increase. But also we see the energy independence increase as well. Finally, we move to the chocolate situation. We see a massive jump as we add in tariff optimization. We increase the solar, we increase the battery size, and we get the customer up to 41,000 or just under 41,000 annual savings. Now, I think what's critical to understand from this, and what I want to be able to prove to you today as we jump into Orkestra and we have a look at the actual project and the analysis, is in each of these situations, I've solved the PPA code to get a rate of return of 12%. And as we see, and as is logical, as you deploy more infrastructure, that cost goes up and therefore the PPA price goes up. But the critical part is that the savings for the customer goes up, and their total net value that they receive from this deal goes up as well, because it's not just their savings go up, of course, also their PPA price goes up, but overall the customer is in a much better position, and we will show you exactly how we model that. Before we do though, I think it's really important to just understand, why is the chocolate option so much better? Why is there such a big £7,000 per annum savings increase? At the end of the day, they're paying a bit more on their PPA for the chocolate, but what we can see is that the strawberry option on the left, we have quite a simple use of the battery. We absorb the solar excess during the middle of the day, which we can see here, and we immediately discharge it as it's available. However, in the chocolate scenario, we implement an EMS and we look at optimizing that customer's tariff. So the EMS can predict that the excess solar, it's not going to completely fill the battery. So let's charge a little bit more during the day, during the early morning and nights at a cheap rate, so that we fully charge that battery. And then instead of immediately discharging it after the excess solar, how about we discharge it in the peak period, where we've either got a peak time of use pricing or a red network tariff band. And the result is that even though in the chocolate scenario we are charging a higher PPA rate, we enable the customer to offset a much higher energy import cost as well. So for this example here, the time of use peak rate, 33p, is 71% higher than the day rate, 19p. So a battery targeting this window will dramatically improve the customer's savings, which is ultimately where we want to get the customer to. And the reason we want to make sure the customer understands this is because it's not just a win for the customer, it's also a great win for you as the PPA co, and ultimately for the investors behind you. Why I say that is because we have to look at also the capital that's being deployed. So in the vanilla only, we get our 12% rate of return on £375,000 deployed. It's a great project on its own, but we can dramatically increase that capital deployed by either adding a battery or even better, adding a battery or adding a larger solar, larger battery, and optimizing the tariff. You can see from the vanilla up to the chocolate, we've almost doubled the capital that we've deployed. We've maintained the same rate of return. And what I really want to show you is that we've also improved the customer's savings and the value to the customer as well. So I'm going to jump into Orkestra and let's have a look at what this actually looks like in practice. And we can have a look at the savings that are being generated for the customer in each of these scenarios as well. Perfect. Mark, do you want to just give me a thumbs up if you can see Orkestra now? Is that screen flicked over? Perfect. All right. So what we're looking at is we're looking at the same case study that we just spoke through. For people who haven't seen Orkestra before, this is what the platform looks like. I'm going to give you a very quick, very brief overview of how it works. And then we're going to dive into our business model builder so that we can see the value that's being created for the customer, as well as the PPA code. So Orkestra, quite simply, the project page is split into 3 sections. We've got our connection, we've got our energy, and we've got our tariffs. So from within this, we set up the connection, which is all about your meter, any import-export limits. We've got the energy, which is where we enable or where we upload the half-hourly data. We set the load of our specific project to make sure all our analysis is specific to this given project. We have got our tariffs. This is all about our energy bill and making sure we set a financial baseline for what our infrastructure is being valued against. For those who haven't used Orkestra before, we have quite a simple structure split between retail tariffs and network tariffs. If you have a customer PDF of their bill, we can scan it via AI and it'll upload your unit rates into an expected bill, which ultimately will form our baseline. From there, that gives us an overview of the status of the project today. And then we want to have a look at testing different infrastructure sizes. So very simply, in this project, I've decided to test solar systems between 400 and 800 kilowatts and battery systems from 0 to 400 kilowatt hours with a 2-hour duration. We hit run. This will run every amalgamation of all the different sizes that we've tested. In this case, we're looking at 85 different solutions. Takes about a minute and a half to run through these. And what it will do is we'll look at each of the different infrastructures that we've deployed. It will compare what our final expected bill is against the current bill, and it will use those savings to provide a financial forecast for the life of your project. So for this project, we've assumed that life is 25 years. What we get is this nice results table where each bar represents one of the different combinations of infrastructure that we've run. Now, I've highlighted 3 of them here, being our vanilla option. So we can see our 500 kilowatt solution, our strawberry option, which is the 700 kilowatt solar with a 200 kilowatt hour battery, and our chocolate solution, which is our 800 kilowatt solar, as well as our 350 kilowatt hour battery. Now, all of these solutions have been ranked on the total net present value that they provide as a project. So if this was purely as a capital project and it was purely as a single stakeholder project, this would be a fair valuation. But what we want to look at today is how does PPAs change this? And to do that, we have Orkestra's business model builder. So our business model builder allows us to look at each of these projects and divide the value between different stakeholders. So I'll just give this a second to load. But essentially what I've done is I've had a look at what PPA rates do I need to give our PPA co a rate of return of 12%. So you can see here, we've got the full project forecast, but importantly, I want to look at what does it look like from the PPA co's perspective, and ultimately, what does it look like from the customer's perspective. So if you remember back to our presentation, we had the vanilla option. This was our simplest solar option. It was our cheapest PPA rate, which was 9.8p per kilowatt hour. And we can see over the life of the project, that 9.8p per kilowatt hour gives us our 12% rate of return. But as you would be well aware, when we have these conversations, it's critical to understand what does this look like from the customer's perspective. So for the customer, they get their bill savings from now having a solar system, but in return, they do have to pay a PPA rate, as they are not the ones who have financed that system. So we get a net savings of about 30,000. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flick over to our strawberry option. And as you remember, the strawberry option was a more expensive PPA because it has more capital deployed. It has both the solar and the battery. So we don't have as low headline rates, but what we can see is that the net present value, as well as the annual savings for the customer, has increased significantly. Now, ultimately, this is a function of the full value pie of that project has increased, and we are still dividing it up between our customer and our PPA co. So PPA co, they get to still achieve their 12% rate of return. They get to deploy £500,000 or just under £500,000 in capital, while the customer, yes, they're paying a higher pence per kilowatt hour rates, but ultimately their NPV and their savings are better. Now, as you can probably guess, where I'm going to next on this is our chocolate solution. So I'm just going to flick this over to chocolates. This is our largest, most expensive solution. Again, you can see the PPA rate, it has increased. So it's a higher headline rates. The PPA co still achieving their 12% rate of return, but the customer is now receiving an NPV of over £1.1 million. So it's a project with the high PPA rate, so it's not going to win on just purely your headline pricing, but the overall value that it offers to your customer, because it's a more capitally efficient project. It has a solar system and a battery that are working together, as well as tariff optimization. It provides a better all-in investment from both the PPA code and the customer's perspective. So I hope that's clear. More than happy to always dive into questions on this and have follow-up sessions. But ultimately, what I'm trying to prove to you here is that there are situations, or it's quite common, that you might have to increase the PPA rates, but you're able to deploy more capital. You're able to deploy more capital more efficiently, and therefore you're able to give the customer a better NPV and a better rate of return on their opportunity, which is fundamentally what the CFOs of the end customers are really looking for. With that, I'm going to jump back to our presentation. I'll finish off the last few slides with our key takeaways. Look, the key point here, as I've gone through, big opportunities form when you start thinking holistically to solve business problems. So we want to make sure we include the technology, the infrastructure that we're choosing for the business model, financing, and the different value stacks. When we bring those three things together, that's where we really start to unlock these large value streams and able to offer customers a more comprehensive product that is not just about offering the lowest price possible on a pence per kilowatt hour basis. So I guess some pro tips that we take away from this, as well as discussions we have with our customers. Firstly, tariffs are already a part of your deal. The question is whether they're working for you or against you. So the customer is already going to be comparing your PPA against their current tariff. You're not adding risk by discussing better tariffs or for solar and batteries. You are replacing a bad assumption with a better one. And I guess what I mean by this is often we have conversations with PPA cos who they don't want to talk about tariffs, or they don't want to open the topic because they believe it's too complex or it's going to somehow kill their solar deal. In our view, this is fundamentally a part of every energy project. It's not a new risk, it's an existing risk. Number two, the risk to PPA cos is not significantly higher when adding batteries to a take or pay structure. While PPA providers must endeavour to deliver an effective solution, it is the customer who's really carrying the risk of the battery. So what we mean by this is by adding the battery, presenting as an upside option, it's not fundamentally changing the risk of your solar investments. If anything, it's giving you more opportunity to sell solar into the project. It increases the load that is available behind the meter. Number three, and this is something we come up quite often, front of the meter revenues are not the saviour. Behind the meter is where C&I value gets unlocked. So when we look at behind the meter, the infrastructure directly reduces the customer's electricity bill. Value captured is independent of the grid prices. Solar and battery plus tariff, they all compound when you get them to work together. And having a fixed PPA versus a volatile grid is a massive selling point for a lot of customers. Being able to lock in long-term energy rates, even if it's 30, 40% off the total demand of the site, it makes a massive difference to CFOs. Finally, the customer sees and feels the value every month. The great thing about PPAs is that it's a clear and obvious reduction on their energy bill. You see it every month compared to before you had the systems. Why this is so much better than front of the meter? We see front of the meter revenue, it's risky, it's exposed to wholesale markets, there's consistent regulatory risk. DNO rules are constantly changing. You can see this around Europe, that other countries are going through reforms at the moment, and structures that previously existed and structures that people previously built their projects on to capitalize on front of the meter revenue don't necessarily still exist in other places. Thirdly, the customer doesn't directly see the bill savings. It's often presented as a profit share or additional value stream. It's becoming increasingly competitive. As more and more batteries enter the market, front of the meter is becoming more and more difficult to predict and to lock in over the long term. Finally, it's complex to model, and it becomes difficult to explain to a C&I buyer, especially when they're used to seeing their energy bills. So key takeaways, 5 things to sort of do differently or to expand on if you're already doing them. Firstly, really understand your customer's problem. Really look at what drives that customer and understand where is the different places that you can provide value, not just providing the lowest headline price. Secondly, sell the solar first. Always try and lock that in, try and get the solar as a done deal, and then make batteries and tariffs as value adds on top of that. Thirdly, think like a CFO, lead with savings, lead with the NPV, the value, discuss the risk, discuss how you are reducing your exposure to price volatility in the future. Don't just try and focus on having the lowest price on a P per kilowatt hour basis in the market. 4, using a battery for tariff optimization. When it's done right, it will immensely grow the value for the customer, especially when you have customers who are on full pass-through tariffs, on time of use tariffs, agile or shapeshifter tariffs, anything where they have market exposure across different time periods. Using a battery smartly in these instances can massively increase the value. Ultimately, increasing that value, it's good for the customer. It also allows you to deploy more infrastructure and get more out of the existing projects you have. 5th, try and make the decision as simple as possible. I know we speak about a lot here today, and there's a lot of different structuring. cash flows and different prices on energy bills. But I would argue, as the PPA codes, as the energy experts, it's your job to try and reduce this complexity as much as possible for the customer. Try and model everything. Try and show them all the different outcomes and solutions, so that you can demonstrate beyond doubt that the options you provide are going to provide value and reduce the energy risk for them. Perfect. I think you guys have listened to me for a fair bit here, so I'm going to hand back to Mark. I hope that was helpful. Like I said, always happy to field questions. Please do submit in Q&A. We will try to get to them. But for now, Mark's going to have a bit of a chat on how Orkestra can help you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Killian. That was super helpful. Yeah, we've got some great questions coming in already, so I don't want to take too long on this. Keen to get into it, and yeah, I really understand how we can help get more PPAs off the ground, including batteries. So where are we? How can we support you as a business to enable this kind of energy intelligence platform, we would call it? So where we see our Orkestra adding most value is actually where you're taking that long-term view of assets, right? And by looking at PPAs and financing models, by definition, you are looking at that long-term view of an asset. And that's where we see our customers moving from this kind of hamster wheel of install, deliver, onto this flywheel, where we're really benefiting from that long-term view of the asset and getting the right project off the ground at the start to meet your customers' drivers, and then actually proving the value ongoing. So how do we do this? Well, it's really about connecting the dots, right? It's connecting the data, as Killian said, being able to model this and really stand in front of a financial decision maker and prove the value and present them with options, right? So if you could move to the next slide, Killian, that would be great. Fantastic. So this is really the flywheel that we enable and how we unlock that, the full value of you taking that long-term view of assets. So with our plan product, then, we're already the market leader in Australia. We've been going 5 years, and that's probably what a lot of you know us for, to be fair. So that is our consultative selling tool, our financial feasibility model, which enables you to get the right size solar and battery solution for your customers, and then actually carve that up in terms of potentially a PPA or a finance model. So that's enabling you to take that consultative selling approach by running up to 250 solutions in less than 60 seconds. We can very quickly hone in on those solutions that actually make financial sense for our customer. So 3 reasons people are using the plan tool. It's really about obviously getting more battery projects off the ground. That's what we're doing, and inadvertently selling more solar as well as a result. It's about bankability. We're now in a position in Australia where you will not find a decent financier that will actually lend on a project without first modeling in Orkestra. So that's really, really important. If you're putting your money where your mouth is, and you want to be pretty damn sure you're getting those returns, right? So that's providing that full revenue breakdown is critical, right? And that's where we can help. Finally, it's about time saving. We know that not all projects are going to work for batteries, and the ones that are never going to fly, we want to get those out of our pipeline and really focus our efforts on those ones that will stack up. So typically that's achieved within half an hour in our plan tool. So we've got our customer the right size solar and battery, where they've installed it, and now we get to actually prove the value to them. So you may have dealt with various different inverter portals, a GrowWatt portal and a Solax portal, and it provides you with lots of error codes. And from an asset management perspective, do I really know whether how important each of those are? How do I know where to focus my efforts? That's where we bring this into a single asset management portfolio in Operate, an API into inverter and meter data, to actually focus your asset management efforts on those assets that are most underperforming, not just technically, but financially. because that's ultimately what we're trying to do here, is focus our efforts on the biggest bang for buck, basically. So we've proven the value in that product. We've taken that consultative selling approach, and now we've got an existing customer that's pretty happy, pretty trusted relationship ongoing with this customer. And now that unlocks an opportunity to actually go back to that same customer and potentially look at a future opportunity for additional savings. So that's where prospect comes in. And we actually can go back into plan and say, oh, you've installed EV chargers, or your loads increased for some other reason, or your tariffs changed, or we've got a tariff opportunity we can present. What does that look like in terms of an additional solar and battery opportunity? And this is how we know, it's always easier to sell to an existing customer than a new one, right? It keeps our customer acquisition costs down, and it's just easier overall, right? And that's how we unlock the benefit of going back into those existing customers and really benefiting from that long-term view of assets. So this is the flywheel. This is where we want to enable our customers to move to this flywheel approach and really support them in that journey. So let's go to the next slide, Killian. Great stuff. So we do offer a 3-week free trial in plan, and also if you've got assets you'd like to run and operate, we do offer a free pilot of that at the moment as well. So let's see what we can do. We can offer a weather adjusted potential in operate to make sure that you're not chasing ghosts on your existing assets as well, and actually potentially wrap up an O&M package in your sale at the start is actually the easiest way to do this as well, so that you can prove the value ongoing for your customer. So next slide, please, Gillian. Fantastic. So there you go. You've got a QR code in the bottom left-hand corner. If you're keen to start your free trial today, you can scan this QR code, and we'll be able to look forward to maximizing the value of batteries on your next project. And at this point, I think I'll be keen to dive into some of those questions. Fantastic. Okay, so let's have a look what we've got coming through. I think we had, first of all, Killian, I think we had a couple of questions around battery replacements. I know that we are able to model this in the tool, and clearly when we're looking over a 25-year lifetime, we are able to look at modeling in a battery replacement. Just check in on this particular project. Did we have a battery replacement in there?
Yeah. So I guess fundamentally, Orkestra, you're able to model battery replacements. It's got the functionality to either model it based on the remaining storage as it degrades over time, or the months. I think I can provide some insight on generally what I see people modeling in the markets, and I think there's really two schools of thoughts. Firstly, is a lot of people model it based on the warranty period, so usually looking at that 10 to 12-year period. I think, in my opinion, and it does definitely depend on the commercial obligations within the PPA, but I would expect a battery to last beyond just the warranty period. They are generally conservative by nature. So we do see lots of people include that replacement cost as, sort of around that 15-year mark. Again, every PPA is slightly different. Some of them may have obligations to replace more frequently as the warranty provides, or maybe just once at the middle of the PPA contract length. So it really does come down to what the commercial structure is that you have, but the functionality is perfectly capable within Orkestra to add in a cash outflow for a new battery within the middle of the project life.
Fantastic. Thanks, Killian. I'm just kind of jumping to the end here a little bit because I think this is a really important question, actually, and I know you've got some really good insights on it. So essentially talking about that mismatch of incentives and basically who's paying for the kit, right? And I know that we're talking about different models that we've learned from in Australia already working well. So I don't know if you're able to jump back into the tool and perhaps have a look at what that could look like.
Sure.
I'll just talk through it while Killian loads that up. I mean, it's a really good point actually, Bill. I've seen your question. What we've seen so far, actually in Australia, is that a solar PPA only plus a lease for the battery can work really well. So Killian will give you some more detail on that.
For sure, for sure. And I guess this is sort of, where we start to get into the more advanced end of the modeling on what can we commercially apply in the real world and how do we legally make sure that our contracts are tight and that everyone is incentivized together. And as Mark says, if you've got a solar PPA plus a battery, there is a bit of a mismatch in incentives in that the PPA co wants to maximize all the electrons being taken, where sometimes that might not necessarily perfectly align with what's the best use of the battery. Sometimes the best use of the battery is different. Sometimes you want to reduce capacity costs. Sometimes it makes sense to charge and discharge with times that don't necessarily align with your solar generation as well. So one thing that we've seen work particularly well in Australia, where we see the market is quite advanced, and what I've worked on in a lot of projects in the past is where we have a solar PPA purely for the PPA, purely for the solar PV system, and then we have a different financing structure for the battery, typically hire purchase or leasing arrangements, where it's a fixed cash flow that the customer pays to the energy service company or the PPA co to provide that battery. Now, why that really helps from a commercial perspective is, firstly, it's far simpler to legally draft and to put into a contract. You don't have to worry about any obligations of when to take energy, when to discharge energy, any obligations about how that battery should be optimized. But rather, from the PPA's perspective, they get a fixed payment from the battery through the lease. And from the customer's perspective, they can operate that battery as they see most fit for themselves. So, for example, got our business model builder here in front of you again. I've just taken the exact same chocolate scenario. And instead of the customer paying a higher PPA rate and assuming that the solar and the battery work perfectly in unison, I've provided a battery leasing payments, which is just based on 8% lease rates, and then resolved our solar PPA with the goal find. What you see, this actually brings the solar PPA rate back down, and it gives you a fixed leasing payments. Fundamentally, it helps align the different stakeholders, and it also makes things commercially a lot simpler when you come to drafting it. So you don't have to worry about any incentives, obligations, or I guess restrictions on how that battery can be used, because as a PPA co, you've already solved for a fixed rate of return on that piece of equipment. I think this is probably something I could talk about all day. So, if there's specific people on the call who want to have a chat, happy to jump on with you as well, Bill, and we can go through it in detail, and we can have a look at one of your projects, and I can also show you some past projects I've worked on where we've employed this structure.
Fantastic. Thanks, Killian. Yeah, I think there's it's really interesting to understand, practically how we can implement this and how we can make it, contractually simpler to implement this value, right? And it's, I think it's very valuable to see those insights in terms of what's worked already in Australia. So super helpful. Thank you. So I think we've got a couple of other questions in terms of how we operate. To Jason's question, in terms of consultancy, our co-founder is actually a consultant himself, so that is very much our background. But we're actually a SaaS model, so we're a subscription service. You can self-serve and you can model your own projects. So you can benefit from that in-house with no kind of back and forth. So that's also how we keep our pricing pretty cost effective. So we can talk through those options, but essentially we'd probably be 3 or 4 times the price if we were doing consultancy. So typically we would support you in a first project to actually unlock the value of the platform. and really speak to how we find the battery opportunity, and particularly in the UK market. And then we would support you ongoing in the tool to really make sure that you're getting full value from it. So I hope that makes sense, answers your question. We had a question around pricing for BESS in the UK. Obviously, this is a kind of sliding scale. It varies massively, but we've heard of anything from kind of £350 a kilowatt hour to £150 a kilowatt hour, which obviously has a huge impact in terms of a rate of return. But I think just to kind of come back to what is actually really important, we find and is actually the most important driving factor of whether you can justify batteries on a site is how hard we can get our battery working. Because what we typically find in the UK is we don't have 3 months, 6 months of fantastic weather, all year round. We've probably got 3 to 6 months of nice weather, unfortunately, which is where we're headed. But yeah, that's really what we find is excess solar is typically not enough to justify the cost of our battery on its own, and that's why by layering in all of this tariff optimization, we start to really get our battery working harder and see the upside in returns and sizing as a result in capital deployed. So I hope that gives you a bit of an insight, but yeah, not a simple answer for that one in terms of pricing. Obviously, as you're aware, yeah, I think the spend is justified mainly by how hard you can get your battery working. Good stuff. Great. Let me just come back to the Q&A. I think it might be a good one for you, Killian, actually, this in terms of moving from that traditionally selling on payback versus perhaps a more of a move to NPV or other metrics that we can use. Are you able to talk to that?
Yeah, very topical question. And I think the reason why this is very topical is it's something traditionally a lot of solar installers have done. And generally, when we think about investments, there's usually 3 main metrics we go to. There's payback period, there's net present value, and there's rates of return. And I think payback period, it's a fantastic metric in that it's super intuitive. Doesn't matter what background you come from, payback period, it makes sense. So what I would say is payback period, it always still makes sense to present. But the big problem with payback period is that it's always going to favor smaller projects. It's always going to favor projects with lower capital costs. So if you're always presenting on payback period, you'll probably find that you're undersizing projects compared to what you could be selling. If that feels like the case, I'd definitely recommend just jump in Orkestra, get a free trial and try it for a week. But when you run all the scenarios next to each other, you'll see the payback period, it's always going to be favoring those small projects. So what I would say is have a look at the different alternatives and see which projects are favored by payback period and which projects are favored by NPV. Secondly, I would suggest becoming really good at explaining what NPV is to customers. Anyone who comes from a financial background will know that this is sort of our holy grail of investment metrics, because it gives a really good weighting to all the different components. It looks at what's the total cost up front, what's the total returns, how long is that project life, how much do you get each year, and it also favors getting cash flow earlier rather than later based on your discount rate. So I think firstly, have a look at practically like which projects are being favored by payback period versus which are being favored by an NPV. And it should become clear when you show those to your end customers that maybe this is actually undersized and maybe payback period is going to incentivize us to put in a 50 kilowatt system when in reality a 100 kilowatt system would give us maybe a slightly longer payback period, but much greater savings and much greater return over the full life of the project.
Cool. Awesome, Killian. Thank you very much. I think just to answer that question on the back of that, in terms of discount rate, I believe 5% is the default figure that we use. So that's reflecting the fact that basically you could go and do something else with that capital. You could go and put it in a savings account potentially and get around 5%. So you drive that assumption in terms of that discount rate that you think is realistic for your customer, but by default it's 5% in the tool. And I guess I just wanted to bring to life that that MPV question that Killian's touched upon from a customer perspective. Like, why do I care about MPV rather than payback period? Well, from a customer perspective, I could go to my customer and say, okay, here's a 10K system. It's a 2-year payback, and they're like, great, fantastic, that sounds awesome. I've only wiped out 5% of their energy bill. But I could go and say, actually, here's a 100 grand system, and this will save you 30K. Okay, it's a 3-year payback. So I've pushed out the payback period, but I might have wiped out 20 or 30% of their bill. So the MPV starts to take into account the size of the solution and recognizes the fact that if we're saving more overall, it may actually be a better solution for your customer. Is that helpful, Killian, in terms of an alternative explanation?
Absolutely. I think it fundamentally it takes into account the quantum of the investment as well and the size of those savings. So might not be as intuitive up front, but once you start to run a few scenarios, it becomes quite obvious that, like Mark says, maybe a larger system might have a slower payback, but for an extra year, you're probably worth getting a much bigger system and saving a lot more money over the remaining 20 odd years that you have.
Good stuff. Okay, I'm going to pick this one from Joe Hampson. It's a great question, Joe. So yeah, in the case that tariff change isn't an option, what else can we do to incentivize batteries? Well, yeah, clearly, if you're getting to the megawatt scale, that's where front of the meter can become more important. But ultimately, we have these playbooks in terms of how to help you spot the battery opportunity. And typically when you're getting to that kind of scale, the megawatt scale, you're going to be looking at a wholesale pass-through tariff. And that's that really complex sort of 40, 50 lines on a bill. And actually, it's then a case of knowing where to look on that bill rather than potentially looking at tariff change. And that's where Orkestra can really help in terms of layering in those different value streams, and we can support you to identify where the battery opportunity is within that existing tariff. So, yeah, I think we can definitely help. Anything to add on that, Killian?
No, I think that sounds good, and I think it also just comes down to why is tariff change not an option? Maybe it's the kind of solution where you size it based on the tariff today, and you maybe consider an upside case in 5 years' time where maybe the project's different, the commercial structuring is different, and then you can think about I guess an upside case.
Nice, great stuff. Okay, so we've got some questions around battery OEMs, and I think it's probably worth touching on how we actually implement this, what Orkestra can model in terms of the hardware solution. So I think that's a really important point in terms of can your hardware actually implement what Orkestra can model. So I think there's obviously kind of varying degrees of functionality in terms of your hardware. So it's always important to check with your hardware provider. And there's really 3 questions you want to be asking your EMS provider. So can I forecast load? Can I forecast load? Can I forecast solar? And can I forecast against a tariff? And if your hardware is capable of doing all those 3 things, it has to be a hard yes to all those 3 questions. Then it's able to implement what Orkestra can actually model, and you can see the benefit of that in terms of the implementation side. And we see that there are market leaders in this space like Sig Energy, for example, that has got one of the best EMSs in the market, but there are close seconds like Sungrow and Solace, which are not far behind as well. So there's actually another presentation we did with our partners Midsummer on that to give you more detail in terms of what that EMS functionality looks like. But it's a fast moving ball game, this space, and so rapidly battery manufacturers are realizing that they simply cannot afford to leave this value on the table, and it's such a key part of the value proposition for batteries that and the other thing to say is there's always the option of a third-party EMS. So you can actually go and install whatever hardware you like, and then as long as they can integrate with a third-party EMS, then you can access these benefits. Anything to add to that one, Killian?
No, I think that's fantastic. Probably the only thing I'd say is that these EMSs are getting more advanced every day, pretty much, and seeing the market grow very quickly in this space. So definitely worth keeping an eye on and staying up to date.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I think we'll probably leave it there because we're coming up to 12 o'clock. And yeah, thanks very much for everyone for your questions. Always really, really insightful this. And I think, what we can see here is there's a massive opportunity in terms of the solar and battery and financing models. And when we can bring this all together, then we unlock opportunities that we would have otherwise missed. So yeah, really excited to work with you all and unlock this opportunity.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.